When an innocent woman stands moments from the gallows with a noose around her neck, a mysterious cowboy emerges from the shadows to challenge her execution with evidence that could shatter everything the town believes about justice. But will his dangerous gambit to save her life cost him his own? A woman's scream cut through the desert air like a knife through silk, but it came from the crowd, not from Clara Whitfield, who stood perfectly still on the wooden platform. The Arizona Territory heat made everything shimmer like a bad dream, and the year 1867 had brought nothing but trouble to the small town of Prescott. Clara's green eyes stayed fixed on the horizon, refusing to look down at the faces below. Faces that had once smiled at her in the general store, faces that now wanted to watch her die. The rope scratched against her neck like a snake made of twine. Her hands, tied behind her back with rough cord, had gone numb 20 minutes ago. The white dress she wore, her Sunday best, now looked more like a burial shroud in the blazing sun. Sweat dripped down her spine, but she wouldn't let them see her shake. "You got anything to say before we finish this business?" Sheriff Caldwell's voice carried across the dusty street like thunder before a storm. He was a good man, Clara thought, just doing what he believed was right. That made it hurt even more. Clara opened her mouth, then closed it again. What could she say? That she was innocent? She'd been saying that for 3 days, and nobody listened. The gold coins in her satchel spoke louder than any words she could offer. The blood on her hands, poor old Peterson's blood, told a story that seemed clear as daylight to everyone except her. Below the platform, Mrs. Henderson clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders despite the heat. "She seemed like such a nice girl," the woman whispered to her husband. "Hard to believe she could kill a man in cold blood." "Money makes people do terrible things," Mr. Henderson replied, shaking his head. "Bank robbery's a hanging offense. Always has been." Clara had heard these conversations 100 times in the past 3 days. The story was simple, they said. She'd walked into the Prescott First National Bank just after it opened. Peterson, the elderly clerk, had been found dead on the floor with a bullet in his chest. Clara had been kneeling beside him, covered in his blood, when the sheriff arrived. The stolen gold was right there in her bag. Open and shut case, they called it. Justice would be swift. But Clara remembered it differently. She'd gone to the bank to withdraw her savings, money she'd earned working 16-hour days at the hotel laundry. She'd found Peterson already dying, already shot, gasping for breath on the cold floor. She tried to help him, pressed her hands against the wound to stop the bleeding. That's when Sheriff Caldwell had burst through the door. "I was trying to save him," she told the sheriff, her voice breaking. "I was trying to help." "Then why was the bank's gold in your bag?" Caldwell had asked, his face sad but determined. Clara had no answer for that. She'd never seen those coins before in her life. The crowd grew restless as the sun climbed higher. Women fanned themselves with their bonnets while men shifted their weight from foot to foot. Children peeked out from behind their mothers' skirts, too young to understand what they were witnessing but old enough to sense the violence in the air. "Time's up, Miss Whitfield," Sheriff Caldwell said, his hand moving to signal the executioner. "May God have mercy on your soul." Clara closed her eyes and thought of her sister Elizabeth in California. She'd been planning to visit her, to start over in a new place where nobody knew her story. Now Elizabeth would only know her as the sister who died a thief and a murderer. The executioner, a thin man with shaking hands, reached for the lever that would drop the platform beneath Clara's feet. His face was pale, and Clara almost felt sorry for him. He didn't want to do this any more than she wanted to die. "Wait a minute there, friend." The voice came from nowhere and everywhere at once. Deep, calm, and carrying the kind of authority that made everyone stop what they were doing and listen. Clara's eyes snapped open, scanning the crowd for the source of those words. The townspeople turned like sunflowers following the sun, their heads swiveling toward the voice. A path began to form through the crowd, people stepping aside without being asked. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs as she strained to see who had spoken. "I said wait." The voice came again, closer now, and Clara caught a glimpse of black hair under a dark hat. "Nobody's dying today. Not yet." The stranger moved through the crowd like water flowing around rocks, and Clara got her first good look at him as he approached the gallows. He was tall, taller than most men in Prescott, with shoulders broad enough to carry heavy burdens. His clothes were dusty from travel, but his gun belt was well-oiled and positioned just right on his hips. This was a man who knew how to use the weapon he carried. But it was his eyes that made Clara's breath catch in her throat. They were the color of winter sky, pale blue and sharp as broken glass. They swept over the crowd with the calm intensity of a hawk circling its prey, missing nothing and judging everything. "You got a name, stranger?" Sheriff Caldwell's voice carried a warning. His own hand had moved to rest on his gun handle, though he hadn't drawn it yet. "Stone. Marcus Stone." The man's voice was steady as bedrock. "And I got something you need to hear before you make a mistake you can't undo." Clara felt hope flutter in her chest like a trapped bird. She didn't know this man, had never seen him before, but something about the way he carried himself made her believe he might actually be able to help her. "What kind of mistake?" Caldwell asked, though his tone suggested he didn't really want to know. Marcus Stone reached into his vest pocket, moving slowly so nobody would think he was going for a weapon. The crowd held its breath as he pulled out a small leather pouch. It jingled softly as he held it up for everyone to see. "The kind where you hang an innocent woman while the real killer walks free," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly across the square. "This here belongs to your bank clerk, Peterson. Found it in Jack Morrison's saddlebags 2 towns over." The crowd erupted in gasps and whispers. Clara's knees nearly buckled as she processed what she'd just heard. Jack Morrison, Deputy Morrison, who'd been so eager to see justice done quickly. Morrison, who'd found the gold in her bag and convinced everyone of her guilt. "That's impossible," Sheriff Caldwell stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. "Morrison was patrolling the outer roads when the robbery happened. He couldn't have. Could he?" Marcus interrupted, stepping closer to the platform. "Think about it, Sheriff. Who else knew the bank's routines? Who else had access to move around town without being questioned? Who else was so quick to point the finger at Miss Whitfield here?" Clara watched the sheriff's face as understanding dawned. She saw the exact moment when doubt crept in, when the certainty in Caldwell's eyes began to crumble. The crowd was murmuring now, loud enough that she could hear bits of conversation. "Always did wonder how Morrison afforded that new saddle. He was awfully quick to suggest hanging her. Never liked that boy much anyway." Marcus Stone opened the leather pouch and shook out its contents. A silver pocket watch tumbled into his palm, its chain catching the sunlight. Clara recognized it immediately. Peterson had been proud of that watch, had shown it to her just last week when she'd made her usual deposit. "This watch has Peterson's initials engraved on the back," Marcus said, holding it high so everyone could see. "PJP Peter Jonathan Peterson." Morrison tried to sell it to a jeweler in Wickenburg, but the man was suspicious. Asked too many questions. So Morrison got nervous and buried it with his other stolen goods. Sheriff Caldwell's face had gone white as fresh snow. "How do you know all this?" "Because I followed him," Marcus replied simply. "Been tracking Morrison for 2 weeks, ever since I heard about a deputy asking questions about fence operations. Man like that draws attention when he's trying to sell stolen goods." Clara felt the noose around her neck differently now. Not as a death sentence, but as a reminder of how close she'd come to paying for another man's crime. Her legs shook with relief and anger in equal measure. "Where is Morrison now?" Caldwell asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's what I'd like to know," Marcus said, his pale eyes scanning the crowd. "Because he should be here watching his plan come to completion. Unless..." A gunshot cracked through the air like a whip, and Marcus Stone dove to the ground as the bullet whistled past his head. The crowd screamed and scattered, people running in all directions as chaos erupted in the dusty street. "Nobody move!" Deputy Jack Morrison's voice boomed from the roof of the general store, where he crouched with a rifle trained on the gallows. "The stranger's lying. He's trying to save his woman with made-up stories." Clara's heart pounded as she realized the truth. Morrison had been there all along, waiting and watching. He'd probably planned to disappear after her hanging, to start fresh somewhere else with his stolen money. But now his secret was out, and he was fighting like a cornered animal. "Morrison," Sheriff Caldwell called out, his own gun finally drawn. "Come down from there. We need to talk." "Nothing to talk about," Morrison shouted back. "That watch could belong to anyone. This drifter's trying to confuse you." Marcus Stone rolled behind a water trough, his own weapon appearing in his hand like magic. "Sheriff," he called out, "you might want to check Morrison's bank records. I think you'll find some interesting deposits that don't match his deputy's wages." The standoff stretched tight as a bowstring. Clara could see Morrison's face from her position on the platform. Sweaty, desperate, and dangerous. This was a man with nothing left to lose, and that made him more deadly than any outlaw. "Cut her loose, Sheriff," Marcus called out. "If I'm lying, you can always put the rope back on her neck. But if I'm telling the truth, you're about to hang an innocent woman while the real killer gets away." Sheriff Caldwell looked up at Clara, then at Morrison on the roof, then at Marcus Stone behind the water trough. His face was the picture of a man caught between duty and doubt, between what he'd believed and what he was beginning to understand. The executioner had already run for cover, leaving Clara alone on the platform with the noose still around her neck. She could hear Morrison reloading his rifle, could see Marcus Stone preparing for another shot. Whatever happened next would determine whether she lived to see another sunset. "Make your choice, Sheriff," Marcus called out, "but make it fast. Morrison's getting ready to shoot again, and this time he might not miss." Sheriff Caldwell's knife sliced through the rope around Clara's neck just as Morrison's second shot splintered the wood beside her head. The sudden freedom made her stumble forward, gasping as air filled her lungs without the scratch of hemp against her throat. Her bound hands made it impossible to catch herself, and she crashed to her knees on the platform's rough planks. "Stay down," Marcus Stone shouted from behind the water trough, returning fire at the general store's roof. His bullet struck the wooden sign above Morrison's hiding spot, sending splinters flying. The deputy cursed and ducked lower, temporarily out of sight. Clara rolled toward the platform's edge, trying to make herself a smaller target. From her new position, she could see townspeople crammed into doorways and pressed against building walls, their faces painted with fear and confusion. Mrs. Patterson clutched her baby tighter while Mr. Chun pulled his children into his restaurant. Everyone wanted to see justice done, but nobody had signed up for a gunfight in the middle of town. "Morrison, you fool," Sheriff Caldwell called out while cutting the ropes from Clara's wrists. "Come down peaceful and we'll sort this out proper." "Nothing to sort." Morrison's voice cracked like a breaking branch. "That drifter's got you all twisted around. I've served this town faithful for 5 years. Marcus Stone studied the roofline, calculating angles and distances. Morrison had picked a good spot, high ground with cover on 3 sides. But the deputy was trapped up there too, with nowhere to run if things went bad. Desperation made men do stupid things, and Morrison was already proving that point. 5 years of stealing from the people you swore to protect, Marcus called back, reloading his revolver with steady hands. "How much did you take, Morrison? How many times did you dip into the banks till when Peterson wasn't looking?" "Lies." But Morrison's voice wavered, and everyone heard it. Clara's mind raced as feeling returned to her freed hands. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place now, painting a picture she should have seen earlier. Morrison had always been friendly to her when she made deposits at the bank, always asking about her plans to visit California. He'd known she was saving money for the trip, knew exactly how much she should have in her account. "Sheriff," she said, her voice hoarse but determined, "check my bank book." Morrison knew I was planning to leave town. He knew I'd be at the bank that morning to withdraw my savings. Caldwell's weathered face darkened as understanding dawned. "He set you up, killed Peterson when the old man caught him stealing, then planted the evidence on you." "A perfect crime," Marcus added, keeping his gun trained on the roof. "Let the innocent woman hang for his murder, then disappear with the money while everyone thought justice was served." Morrison's rifle barrel appeared over the roof's edge again, but this time he aimed at Clara instead of Marcus. "Shut up, all of you. You don't know what you're talking about." The shot went wide as Marcus returned fire, forcing Morrison back into cover. But Clara had seen the desperate rage in the deputy's eyes, the look of a man whose careful plans were crumbling around him like a house built on sand. "He's going to try to kill me?" she realized, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "Even if it means dying himself. I'm the only witness who can prove he was in the bank that day." Marcus Stone's jaw tightened. He'd seen that kind of desperation before during the war, when cornered soldiers chose to go down fighting rather than surrender. Morrison wasn't thinking about escape anymore. He was thinking about silencing the one person who could destroy him completely. "We need to get you out of here," Marcus told Clara, his eyes never leaving the roofline. "This platform makes you a perfect target." But before anyone could move, Morrison stood up on the roof, his rifle raised and ready. His face was streaked with sweat and dirt, his eyes wild with the knowledge that his world was ending. "If I'm going down, she's coming with me." The rifle crack echoed through the street like thunder, but Marcus was already moving. He launched himself from behind the water trough, diving toward the platform as the bullet whistled through the space where Clara's head had been a heartbeat before. His shoulder caught her in the ribs, sending them both tumbling off the platform and into the dust below. They hit the ground hard, Marcus taking the worst of the impact to protect Clara from the fall. She felt the air whoosh out of her lungs as they rolled together, coming to rest behind the platform's supporting posts. Above them, Morrison was already working the rifle's bolt, preparing for another shot. "Can you move?" Marcus gasped, tasting blood where he'd bitten his tongue. Clara nodded, though her side ached where his shoulder had hit her. "I think so. Then we move on 3. Sheriff's got a clear shot from where he is now, but we need to stay low." Morrison's voice drifted down from the roof, high and strained. "Come out and face justice, Clara Whitfield. You killed a good man. You killed him." Clara shouted back, surprising herself with her own anger. "Peterson trusted you. We all did." The silence stretched long enough for Clara to count her heartbeats. When Morrison spoke again, his voice had changed, becoming flatter and more dangerous. "Maybe I did. Maybe old Peterson got too curious about my business. But you're still going to hang for it." Sheriff Caldwell had worked his way closer to the general store, using the chaos to position himself for a better shot. His face was grim with the knowledge that he'd almost hanged an innocent woman, almost let a murderer walk free. The weight of that near mistake pressed down on him like a physical thing. "This ends now, Morrison," Caldwell called out. "Throw down your weapon and come down peaceful." Morrison's answer was another rifle shot that shattered the window of the barbershop. Glass rained down on the wooden sidewalk like frozen tears, and Mr. Rodriguez the barber yelped as he dove deeper into his shop. Marcus Stone counted the shots in his head. Morrison was using a lever-action rifle, probably held 8 rounds. He'd fired 4 times now, which meant 4 shots left before he'd need to reload. If they could force him to waste those bullets. "Clara," Marcus whispered, "when I give the word, run for the hotel entrance. Don't look back, don't hesitate. Just run." "What about you?" "I'll keep Morrison busy." Sheriff Caldwell's almost in position for a clean shot. Clara studied Marcus's face, seeing the determination there, the willingness to risk his life for hers. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." Marcus was quiet for a moment, listening to Morrison curse and reload above them. "Maybe that's exactly why," he said finally. "Sometimes helping a stranger is the only way to prove you're still human." Before Clara could ask what he meant, Marcus rolled away from her, coming up with his gun blazing. Morrison's rifle swung toward this new threat, giving Clara the opening she needed to sprint for safety. She ran like her life depended on it because it did. Clara burst through the hotel's front door like a wild horse escaping a burning barn, startling Mrs. Kowalski so badly that the elderly woman dropped her knitting and screamed. The comfortable lobby with its faded carpet and dusty furniture felt like sanctuary after the chaos of the street, but Clara could still hear gunshots echoing outside. "Child, what in heaven's name is happening out there?" Mrs. Kowalski demanded, clutching her chest. Sounds like a war. Deputy Morrison, Clara gasped, trying to catch her breath. He's the one who killed Peterson. He tried to frame me for it. Mrs. Kowalski's weathered face crumpled with shock. Jack Morrison? But he's such a polite young man. Always tips his hat when he passes by. Through the hotel's front window, Clara could see Marcus Stone crouched behind an overturned wagon, trading shots with Morrison on the roof. Each gunshot made her flinch, made her heart race faster. The stranger who'd saved her life was risking everything to keep her safe, and she didn't even know why. He's been stealing from the bank, Clara explained, peering carefully around the window frame. Marcus Stone proved it with Peterson's watch. Morrison killed Peterson to keep his secret, then put the blame on me. The old woman's face hardened like clay in a kiln. That explains why my deposit was short last month. I thought I'd miscounted, but Morrison handled that transaction. She moved to the window beside Clara, her eyes flashing with anger. How dare he steal from hard-working folks? Outside, Sheriff Caldwell had reached the side of the general store. He pressed his back against the wooden wall, preparing to climb the external stairs that led to the store's second floor. From there, he could reach the roof where Morrison was making his last stand. But Morrison wasn't finished yet. The deputy had spotted Caldwell's movement and was now firing down at the sheriff, forcing him to take cover behind a pile of grain sacks. The bullets punched through the burlap, sending streams of wheat cascading onto the wooden sidewalk. He's trapped the sheriff, Clara realized, her hands pressed against the glass. Morrison can see everything from up there. Marcus Stone seemed to understand the problem too. He rose from behind the wagon and deliberately exposed himself, drawing Morrison's fire away from Caldwell. The deputy's rifle swung toward this more obvious threat, giving the sheriff the chance he needed to dash up the stairs. That man's going to get himself killed trying to save you, Mrs. Kowalski observed, her voice softer now. Must think you're pretty special. Clara watched Marcus dodge another bullet, rolling behind a horse trough as splinters exploded from the wagon behind him. I don't understand it, she whispered. He said he followed Morrison here, but why? What made him care about proving my innocence? Some men are born to fight other people's battles, the old woman said. My late husband was like that. Couldn't stand to see injustice, even when it wasn't his concern. Sheriff Caldwell had reached the second floor now, moving carefully across the building's flat roof. Morrison was so focused on trying to hit Marcus that he didn't notice the lawman approaching from behind. But Clara could see disaster coming. Morrison would spot Caldwell any second, and then the sheriff would be trapped on the roof with a desperate killer. I have to help them, Clara said, turning toward the door. Mrs. Kowalski grabbed her arm with surprising strength. Absolutely not. You stay right here where it's safe. But they're risking their lives for me. I can't just hide while they fight my battles. And what exactly do you plan to do? You don't have a gun, you don't know how to fight. All you'd accomplish is getting yourself killed, and then their sacrifice would be for nothing. Clara knew the old woman was right, but the helplessness felt like acid in her stomach. She'd spent 3 days in jail, 3 days watching people decide her fate without any input from her. Now strangers were bleeding in the street to prove her innocence, and she was hiding behind hotel windows like a frightened child. Outside, Morrison's rifle clicked empty. Clara heard him curse as he fumbled for more ammunition, and she knew this was Caldwell's chance. The sheriff rose from his crouch, gun drawn, ready to end the standoff once and for all. Jack Morrison. Caldwell's voice carried clearly across the rooftop. You're under arrest for the murder of Peter Peterson and the theft of bank funds. Morrison spun around, his face twisted with rage and desperation. In his hands was a second gun, a pistol he'd kept hidden as backup. The two men faced each other across the roof like gunslingers in a dime novel, except this was real, and someone was about to die. Should have minded your own business, Caldwell, Morrison snarled. Should have let the woman hang and been done with it. Can't do that, Jack. Not when I know the truth. Morrison's laugh was sharp and bitter. The truth? The truth is that Peterson was stealing from the bank for months. I caught him at it, tried to arrest him, and he fought back. I killed him in self-defense. Even from the hotel window, Clara could see that Sheriff Caldwell didn't believe a word of it. Peterson had been an honest man, respected by everyone in town. The idea that he'd steal from his own bank was laughable. "Nice try," Caldwell said, his gun steady in his hand. "But we both know Peterson never stole so much as a penny. You killed him because he caught you with your hand in the till." Morrison's face flushed red with anger. "Prove it." "Already did. Marcus Stone's got the evidence. Peterson's watch, your secret bank accounts, witness testimony from 3 different towns about your spending habits." Caldwell took a step closer. "It's over, Jack. Drop the gun and come peaceful." For a moment, Clara thought Morrison might surrender. His shoulders sagged, and the fight seemed to go out of him like air from a punctured balloon. But then his grip tightened on the pistol, and she saw the same desperate rage that had driven him to kill Peterson in the first place. "If I'm going to hang anyway," Morrison said, raising his weapon, "I might as well make it count." The 2 guns fired almost simultaneously, the sound crashing across the rooftop like competing thunderclaps. Clara screamed and pressed her face to the window, trying to see through the smoke that drifted across the roof. When the air cleared, only one man was still standing. Sheriff Caldwell holstered his smoking gun and knelt beside Morrison's still form. The deputy's eyes stared sightlessly at the Arizona sky. His secret dies with him on the weathered rooftop where his greed had finally caught up with him. Below in the street, Marcus Stone emerged from behind the horse trough, his pale eyes scanning for any remaining threats. Finding none, he looked directly at the hotel window where Clara stood watching. Even from that distance, she could see the relief in his expression, the weight lifting from his shoulders now that the danger had passed. Clara realized she was crying tears of relief, of gratitude, of overwhelming emotion she couldn't quite name. The nightmare was finally over. Morrison was dead, the truth was revealed, and she was free. Free to live, free to choose her own path, free to find out why a stranger had risked everything to save her life. Mrs. Kowalski patted her shoulder gently. "It's finished, child. You can start living again." But as Clara watched Marcus Stone walk toward the hotel, she wondered if her real story was just beginning. Marcus Stone's boots echoed against the hotel's wooden steps as he climbed toward Clara's room, each footfall carrying the weight of words he'd never expected to speak. 3 hours had passed since Morrison's death, 3 hours of statements to the sheriff and explanations to curious townspeople. But now came the hardest part, facing the woman whose life he'd saved and explaining why he'd really come to Prescott. Clara opened the door before he could knock, as if she'd been waiting by the window watching for him. Her green eyes searched his face, looking for answers to questions she hadn't yet learned to ask. The late afternoon sunlight streaming through the hallway window caught the copper highlights in her hair, making her look younger than her 24 years. "You're hurt," she said, noticing the dried blood on his shirt sleeve where Morrison's bullet had grazed him. "It's nothing serious," Marcus replied, though the wound throbbed with each heartbeat. "Just a scratch." Clara stepped aside to let him enter the small room she'd rented for her planned stay in Prescott. It was simple but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single chair by the window. Her few belongings sat packed in a worn carpet bag on the bed, ready for a journey she'd thought she'd never make. "Mrs. Kowalski brought me some coffee," Clara said, gesturing to a pot on the washstand. "Would you like some?" Marcus nodded, settling into the chair while Clara poured 2 cups. Her hands shook slightly as she handed him the steaming liquid, and he noticed she was still wearing the same white dress from the gallows, the dress that had almost become her burial shroud. "You should know," Clara began, sitting on the edge of the bed, "that Sheriff Caldwell found Morrison's hiding place behind the jail. There was almost $3,000 in stolen money, plus jewelry and other valuables taken from bank customers over the past 2 years. Marcus sipped his coffee, studying her face over the rim of the cup. "That explains how he afforded those expensive boots and that new saddle. A deputy's pay wouldn't cover luxuries like that." "The sheriff also found a list," Clara continued, her voice growing stronger. "Names of people Morrison planned to rob once he left town. My name was at the top, along with details about my planned trip to California. This was new information to Marcus, and it painted an even darker picture of Morrison's character. The deputy hadn't just been a thief. He'd been planning to become a highway robber, targeting innocent travelers for whatever money they carried. You would have been walking into a trap, Marcus said grimly. He probably would have followed you out of town, killed you on the trail, and taken everything you owned. Clara set down her coffee cup with a sharp clink. That's what I don't understand. How did you know? How did you know to come here, to look for evidence, to save my life? Marcus Stone stared into his coffee, as if the dark liquid might hold the answers he was struggling to find. This was the conversation he'd been dreading. The moment when he'd have to reveal the truth about his past and his connection to Jack Morrison. Morrison and I have history, he said finally. We served together during the war, in a cavalry unit stationed in New Mexico territory. He was different then, younger, more idealistic. But war changes people, and not always for the better. Clara leaned forward, sensing there was more to the story. What happened? Our unit was tasked with protecting supply wagons traveling between army posts. Good duty, mostly safe, but Morrison got greedy. He started taking things from the wagons, little things at first, then bigger items. When I confronted him about it, he said the army owed him more than they were paying. Marcus paused, remembering those hot, dusty days when honor had seemed like a luxury they couldn't afford. I should have reported him then, but he was my friend. I thought I could talk sense into him, convince him to stop before someone noticed. But someone did notice, Clara guessed. A supply sergeant named Williams. Good man, honest as the day is long. He caught Morrison red-handed stealing medical supplies meant for a field hospital. Morrison panicked and hit Williams with a rifle but cracked his skull. Williams lived, but he was never quite right afterward. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. The pattern was clear. Morrison had been willing to hurt innocent people to protect his secrets long before he'd killed Peterson. I testified against Morrison at his court-martial, Marcus continued. He was dishonorably discharged and sentenced to 2 years in military prison. As they led him away, he swore he'd make me pay for betraying him. So when you heard about the bank robbery and Morrison's involvement, I knew he was up to his old tricks. But I also knew he'd blame me for ruining his army career, for forcing him into a life of crime. Marcus met Clara's eyes directly. I came to Prescott to settle accounts with Morrison, not to save you. Finding out about your situation was just luck. Clara absorbed this revelation in silence. The man who'd risked his life to save hers had originally come to town seeking revenge against an old enemy. It changed nothing about what he'd done for her, but it complicated her feelings about his motives. Are you disappointed? Marcus asked, reading the confusion in her expression. I don't know, Clara admitted. Part of me is grateful no matter why you came, but another part wonders what would have happened if Morrison hadn't been here. Would you have ridden through town without stopping? Would you have let me hang if it didn't serve your purpose? Marcus set down his coffee cup and leaned back in the chair. That's a fair question, and I wish I had a good answer for it. All I can say is that when I saw you standing on that platform, when I realized what was happening, I couldn't walk away. Maybe that makes me a better man than I thought I was. The room fell quiet except for the distant sounds of the town settling into evening. Somewhere outside, a dog barked and children called to each other as they played in the dusty streets. Normal sounds of normal life, the kind of life Clara had thought she'd lost forever. What happens now? She asked. Morrison's dead. The truth is known. But where does that leave us? That depends, Marcus said carefully. What were your plans before all this happened? I was going to California to visit my sister Elizabeth. She lives in San Francisco with her husband and children. I haven't seen her in 3 years. Clara's voice grew wistful. I was going to surprise her. Show up on her doorstep with enough money to stay for a few months. And now, Clara gestured around the small room. Now I'm free to go anywhere I want, but I'm not sure I want to go alone. 3 days on death row changes a person's perspective about a lot of things. Marcus Stone studied her face, seeing something there that made his heart beat faster. What kind of things? Like the value of having someone you can trust. Someone who'll stand up for what's right even when it's dangerous. Clara met his gaze steadily. Someone like you. The weight of her words settled between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Marcus had spent 5 years drifting from town to town, taking odd jobs and avoiding personal connections. The idea of traveling with someone, of being responsible for another person's safety and happiness, both terrified and attracted him. California's a long way from here, he said finally. Dangerous country, especially for travelers carrying money. Are you saying I need protection? I'm saying we might be able to help each other. You need someone to watch your back on the trail, and I need. Marcus paused, searching for the right words. I need a reason to believe I'm more than just a drifter with a gun. Clara smiled. The first genuine smile he'd seen from her since their first meeting. Is that your way of asking to travel with me, Mr. Stone? I suppose it is, Miss Whitfield. If you'll have me. Outside the window, the sun was setting over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new roads to travel, new choices to make. But for the first time in years, neither Clara nor Marcus would face those challenges alone. Dawn crept across Prescott like a shy cat, painting the desert mountains in soft shades of pink and orange as Clara secured her belongings to the sturdy mare Sheriff Caldwell had helped her purchase. The horse was a calm, reliable animal named Buttercup, chosen more for her steady temperament than her speed. Marcus had insisted on an animal that wouldn't spook easily, given the dangers they'd face on the long trail to California. You sure about this saddle? Marcus asked, checking the leather straps one final time. His own black stallion, Thunder, stood patiently nearby, loaded with supplies for their journey. It's going to be a lot of hours in that seat over the next few weeks. Clara swung up onto Buttercup's back with surprising grace, settling into the saddle like she'd been born to it. I learned to ride before I could properly walk, she said with a grin. My father used to say I was part horse myself. The early morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of sage and the promise of another scorching day ahead. Most of the town was still asleep, but a few early risers had gathered to see them off. Mrs. Kowalski stood on the hotel's front porch, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. You take care of yourself, child, the old woman called out, and write to me when you reach California, so I know you arrived safely. Sheriff Caldwell approached with an envelope in his weathered hands. This here's a letter explaining what happened in Prescott, he told Clara. In case anyone questions your character along the way. It's got my official seal and signature. Clara tucked the letter into her saddlebag, touched by the gesture. 3 days ago, this same man had been preparing to hang her. Now he was providing character references and well wishes for her journey. The truth had a powerful way of changing people's attitudes. Sheriff, Marcus said, leaning down from Thunder's back, you might want to check with other towns about suspicious deputy activity. Morrison probably wasn't the only lawman who turned crooked during these hard times. Caldwell nodded grimly. Already sent telegrams to 3 neighboring counties. If there are others like Morrison out there, we'll find them. As they prepared to ride out, Dr. Mitchell emerged from his office carrying a small leather bag. Medical supplies, he explained, handing the bag to Clara. Bandages, laudanum for pain, something for fever. You never know what you might encounter on the trail. Clara accepted the gift gratefully, remembering how helpless she'd felt trying to save Peterson with nothing but her bare hands. Thank you, Doctor. That's very thoughtful. The sun climbed higher as they made their final preparations, and Clara found herself studying Marcus's profile as he adjusted his rifle in its saddle scabbard. She still knew very little about this man who'd saved her life. This quiet stranger who'd agreed to escort her across dangerous territory to a new life in California. Nervous? Marcus asked, noticing her scrutiny. A little, Clara admitted. Yesterday I thought I was going to die. Today I'm starting a grand adventure with a man I've known for less than 24 hours. It's a lot to process. Marcus guided Thunder closer to Buttercup, close enough that their stirrups almost touched. We can take this as slow as you need, he said seriously. If you change your mind about traveling together, just say the word. I'll see you safely to the next town, and you can continue alone or find other traveling companions. Clara shook her head. I'm not changing my mind. I'm just trying to understand why you're willing to do this. What do you get out of escorting me to California? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his pale blue eyes fixed on the horizon where the desert met the sky. Maybe a chance to be the man I used to be, he said finally. Before the war, before I learned that sometimes good people have to do terrible things to survive. There was pain in his voice, old wounds that hadn't quite healed despite the passage of time. Clara sensed there were stories behind that pain, experiences that had shaped him into the careful, watchful man he'd become. But those stories would have to wait for campfires and quiet evenings when trust had grown stronger between them. Well then, she said, gathering Buttercup's reins. Let's go find out who we're supposed to be. They rode out of Prescott as the sun cleared the eastern mountains, their horses' hooves raising small clouds of dust that sparkled in the golden light. Behind them, the town continued its daily routine, shopkeepers opening their stores, children walking to school, ordinary people living ordinary lives. But ahead lay the unknown, 1,000 miles of desert, mountains, and possibilities. As they crested the first hill outside town, Clara turned in her saddle for one last look at Prescott. From this distance, she could just make out the gallows where she'd almost died, now standing empty in the town square. A shiver ran down her spine as she remembered the feel of the rope around her neck, the faces of the crowd eager to watch her die. Regrets? Marcus asked, following her gaze. No, Clara said firmly, facing forward again. Just making sure I remember where I've been so I appreciate where I'm going. The trail stretched ahead of them like a ribbon of possibility, winding through landscapes Clara had only dreamed of seeing. She'd heard stories of the journey to California, tales of desert crossings and mountain passes, of bandits and hostile tribes, of travelers who started the journey but never finished it. But she'd also heard stories of success, of people who'd made new lives for themselves in the golden land beside the Pacific Ocean. How long do you think it will take? She asked as they settled into the rhythm of travel. 6 weeks if we're lucky and the weather holds, Marcus replied. 8 or 9 if we run into trouble. What kind of trouble? Marcus considered this carefully. Sandstorms that can last for days. Flash floods that wash out bridges and roads. Broken wheels or lame horses. Sickness. And then there are the human dangers. Bandits. Claim jumpers. Desperate men who see travelers as easy targets. Clara absorbed this soberly. You're trying to scare me. I'm trying to prepare you. The trail to California isn't a Sunday ride in the park. People die out there. Good people who just wanted a better life. Marcus's voice softened. But people also succeed. They reach California. They build new lives. They find happiness they never thought possible. The horses settled into a steady pace as the desert opened up around them. In the distance, mountains rose like purple ghosts against the blue sky, marking the path they'd follow toward their destination. Clara felt a mixture of excitement and terror that reminded her of standing on the edge of a cliff, dangerous, but also exhilarating. Marcus, she said as they rode, can I ask you something personal? Depends on how personal. Do you have family somewhere? People who are wondering where you are. Marcus was quiet for so long that Clara thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible above the sound of their horses' hooves. Had a wife once, Sarah. She died of fever while I was away with the cavalry. By the time I got word and made it home, she'd already been buried for 2 months. He paused, his jaw tight with old pain. Her family blamed me for not being there when she needed me. Said if I'd been a proper husband instead of a soldier, she might have lived. Clara felt her heart ache for him. I'm sorry. That must have been terrible. It was. After that, I just started drifting. Seemed easier than staying in one place where everything reminded me of what I'd lost. They rode in companionable silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts as the desert landscape rolled past. Clara found herself thinking about the strange turns life could take. How a morning that had started with her preparing to die had somehow become the beginning of the greatest adventure of her life. The sun climbed higher, and the desert heat began to build, but Clara felt hopeful for the first time in months. She was free, she was alive, and she had a chance to start over in a place where nobody knew her story. Whatever challenges lay ahead on the trail to California, she would face them with courage and determination. And she wouldn't face them alone. Clara's scream pierced the desert air as Buttercup stumbled into a hidden gopher hole, sending both horse and rider tumbling into the sandy earth with a sickening crack that echoed across the empty landscape. The mare's agonized whinny cut through Marcus like a knife as he leaped from Thunder's back, his heart pounding with fear for both Clara and the injured animal that had carried her faithfully for 3 days across the unforgiving Arizona territory. "Don't move," Marcus commanded as Clara tried to push herself up from where she'd landed. Blood trickled from a cut on her forehead, and her left arm hung at an odd angle that made his stomach clench with worry. "Let me check you for broken bones before you try to stand." Buttercup thrashed weakly in the sand beside them, her front leg bent in a way that told Marcus everything he needed to know. The mare's eyes rolled white with pain and terror, foam gathering at the corners of her mouth as she fought against the agony that shot through her shattered bone. "Is she going to be all right?" Clara whispered, her voice thick with tears as she watched her faithful companion suffer. "Can we help her?" Marcus knelt beside the injured horse, running his hands gently along her leg to confirm what he already suspected. The break was clean but severe, the kind of injury that meant death in the wilderness miles from any veterinarian. His own eyes burned with unshed moisture as he realized what he'd have to do. "Clara," he said quietly, helping her sit up against a nearby boulder. "Buttercup's leg is broken badly. There's nothing we can do for her out here." Understanding dawned in Clara's green eyes, followed by a fresh wave of tears. "No, there has to be something. We can't just—" "I'm sorry." Marcus drew his pistol with a heavy heart, hating what came next but knowing it was the only mercy they could offer the suffering animal. "I'll make it quick. She won't feel any more pain." The gunshot cracked across the desert like thunder, sending a flock of ravens spiraling up from a distant Joshua tree. Clara buried her face in her hands, sobbing for the gentle mare who'd carried her away from Prescott and toward her dreams of California. Buttercup had been more than transportation. She'd been a companion, a friend, a symbol of the new life Clara was building for herself. Marcus holstered his weapon and knelt beside Clara, checking her injured arm with gentle fingers. "It's not broken," he said with relief, "but it's badly sprained. We'll need to make a sling and keep it still for several days." "How?" Clara asked through her tears. "We're in the middle of nowhere, and now I don't have a horse. I can't ride double with you all the way to California." Marcus looked around at the empty desert stretching endlessly in all directions. They were still 2 days from the next settlement, a tiny trading post called Dusty Creek where they'd planned to resupply. Thunder was strong, but carrying 2 people across that distance would exhaust even the powerful stallion. "There's an old mining camp about 5 miles north of here," Marcus said, remembering the landmarks from his previous travels through this region. "Been abandoned for years, but the buildings might still be standing. We can rest there while your arm heals and figure out our next move." Clara wiped her eyes with her good hand, trying to pull herself together. The practical side of her nature was already working on the problem, pushing grief aside to focus on survival. "What about supplies?" "We left most of our food and water with Buttercup's pack." Marcus walked to where the mare lay still in the sand, his jaw tight with the unpleasant task ahead. Buttercup's saddlebags contained their medicine, extra ammunition, and most importantly, their water barrels. Without these supplies, they'd die of thirst long before reaching the next town. "Help me get these bags off her," he said grimly. "We'll take what we can carry and cache the rest. Maybe we can come back for it later." Working together despite Clara's injured arm, they stripped the essential supplies from Buttercup's gear. Marcus fashioned a crude pack from a blanket, loading it with water, jerky, hardtack, and the medical supplies Dr. Mitchell had given them. The weight would slow Thunder down, but it was better than traveling empty-handed through the desert. "Can you ride behind me?" Marcus asked as he helped Clara to her feet. It'll be uncomfortable with that arm, but it's only 5 miles. Clara nodded, though her face was pale with pain and exhaustion. I can manage. But Marcus, what happens after we reach this mining camp? Even if my arm heals, I still won't have a horse. Marcus boosted her carefully onto Thunder's back, positioning her behind his saddle where she could hold on with her good arm. We'll figure something out. Maybe there's an old pack mule still wandering around the camp. Mining operations usually kept extra animals. As they rode north toward the abandoned camp, Clara pressed her face against Marcus's back, drawing comfort from his steady presence. The desert heat was building toward its daily peak, and waves of heated air shimmered up from the sand like liquid silver. In the distance, buzzards circled lazily, drawn by the scent of death that would soon attract other scavengers to Buttercup's remains. I should have been watching the ground more carefully, Clara said, guilt weighing heavy in her voice. If I'd seen that hole. Desert's full of hidden dangers, Marcus replied, guiding Thunder carefully around a patch of prickly pear cactus. Gopher holes, snake dens, soft sand that'll trap a horse's leg. Even experienced travelers make mistakes out here. The mining camp appeared gradually through the heat haze, a collection of weathered wooden buildings clustered around the entrance to a played-out silver mine. Most of the structures had partially collapsed, their roofs caved in by years of neglect and harsh weather. But one building near the center of the camp still looked solid, its walls intact and its door hanging crooked but functional. Home sweet home, Marcus said grimly as he helped Clara down from Thunder's back. Let's see what we're working with. Inside the surviving building, they found the remains of what had once been the camp's supply office. Broken shelves lined the walls, and papers yellowed with age littered the floor like autumn leaves. But the roof was solid, the walls would block the wind, and there was even an old stone fireplace that could provide warmth during the cold desert nights. It's not the Palace Hotel, Clara said, attempting a weak smile. But it'll do. Marcus spread their blankets on the cleanest section of floor he could find, then helped Clara settle down with her back against the wall. Her arm was swelling now, and dark bruises were beginning to show through the tear in her dress sleeve. The fall had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. Rest while I check the other buildings, Marcus said, handing her the water barrel. Take small sips, we need to make this last. Outside, Marcus explored the ruins of the mining camp with growing concern. The other buildings were too damaged to provide shelter, and there were no signs of animals. Not even bones from horses or mules that might have been left behind. The camp had been picked clean by scavengers in time, leaving nothing useful for stranded travelers. But as he searched through the collapsed remains of what had been a stable, Marcus found something that made his pulse quicken. Will ruts in the hard-packed earth, too fresh to be from the mining days. Someone had been here recently, probably within the last few weeks. The question was whether that someone had been friend or foe. Marcus studied the tracks carefully, reading the story they told in the desert sand. A single wagon, heavily loaded based on how deep the ruts cut into the ground, headed west toward California, same direction he and Clara were traveling. But wagon travelers usually moved in groups for protection. The fact that this one was alone suggested either great confidence or great desperation. When he returned to their shelter, Clara was examining the contents of their medical bag with her good hand. Dr. Mitchell packed laudanum for pain, she said, holding up a small brown bottle. Should I take some for my arm? Save it for when the pain gets really bad, Marcus advised, settling down beside her. We might need it more later. Clara nodded, setting the bottle aside. Find anything useful out there? Marcus hesitated, then decided she deserved to know about the wagon tracks. They were partners in this survival situation, and keeping secrets wouldn't help either of them. Someone's been through here recently. Single wagon heading west. Could be nothing, or it could mean we're not as alone out here as we thought. The implications hung between them like smoke from a dying fire. Other travelers could mean rescue, a chance to buy or trade for a new horse. But they could also mean danger, especially if those travelers were the kind who preyed on stranded people in the wilderness. What do you think we should do? Clara asked. Marcus looked out through the broken window at the empty desert beyond. We wait and see what tomorrow brings. Your arm needs time to heal, and thunder needs rest after carrying double. If whoever left those tracks comes back this way, we'll deal with that when it happens. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Clara found herself thinking about how quickly everything could change. This morning she'd been riding her own horse toward a new life in California. Now she was injured and stranded in an abandoned mining camp, dependent on a man she'd known for less than a week. But as she watched Marcus carefully ration their water and arrange their supplies for maximum efficiency, she felt grateful rather than frightened. Some men would have left her behind when Buttercup broke her leg, choosing to save themselves rather than risk their own survival for a stranger. Marcus had never even considered abandoning her. "Thank you," she said quietly as darkness settled over the desert. "For what? For not leaving me behind. For not deciding I was too much trouble." Marcus met her eyes in the gathering dusk. "We're in this together, Clara. Whatever comes next, we face it together." Outside their shelter, coyotes began their nightly chorus, their voices rising and falling like ghostly music across the empty landscape. But inside the ruined building, two people who'd found each other by chance were discovering that sometimes the best partnerships are forged in the crucible of shared hardship. Marcus jolted awake to the sound of wagon wheels grinding against stone, his hand instinctively reaching for his pistol, as voices drifted through the pre-dawn darkness outside their shelter. Clara stirred beside him, her injured arm causing her to gasp softly as movement sent pain shooting through her shoulder. The approaching travelers were trying to be quiet, but desert silence amplified every whisper, every creak of leather, every snort from their animals. "3 men, maybe 4, Marcus whispered, pressing his eye to a gap in the wooden wall. "They've stopped about 50 yards out, probably deciding whether to investigate the camp or move on." Clara struggled to sit up, biting back a cry as her sprained arm protested the movement. Through the broken window, she could see the faint outline of a covered wagon silhouetted against the star-filled sky. Oil lanterns flickered like fireflies as the strangers set up what appeared to be a temporary camp. "Maybe they're just travelers like us," Clara whispered hopefully. "People heading to California who decided to rest here for the night." Marcus shook his head, his expression grim in the faint starlight. "Honest travelers don't make camp in the middle of the night. They stop before dark or keep moving until dawn. These men are up to something else." As if to prove his point, one of the strangers separated from the group and began walking toward their building, a rifle held ready in his hands. His boots crunched softly on the gravel as he approached, pausing every few steps to listen for sounds of life from within the ruins. "Someone's definitely in there, boys," the man called back to his companions. "I can smell a campfire, and there's a horse tied up behind the building." Marcus cursed silently. In their concern for Clara's injury, he'd forgotten to properly conceal Thunder's presence. Now their visitors knew exactly where to find them, and the element of surprise was lost. "Come out peaceful-like," another voice called from the wagon. "We just want to talk business." "What kind of business?" Marcus called back, positioning himself where he could cover the doorway while keeping Clara behind him. "The kind that keeps everyone breathing," came the reply, followed by rough laughter from multiple throats. "We're reasonable men, but we don't like being kept waiting." Clara felt ice form in her stomach as she recognized the tone in the stranger's voice. These weren't fellow travelers seeking shelter. They were predators who'd found prey. The kind of men who haunted the wilderness trails, taking what they wanted from anyone too weak to stop them. "Marcus," she whispered, "my arm's too injured to be much help in a fight." "Then we don't fight unless we have to," Marcus replied, though his grip tightened on his weapon. "Sometimes talking's the better part of valor." The first stranger had reached their building now, close enough that they could hear his breathing through the thin walls. "I'm coming in," he announced. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Marcus made a quick decision. "We're coming out," he called. "No need for violence here." He helped Clara to her feet, supporting her injured arm as they moved toward the crooked door. Better to meet these men in the open where they had room to maneuver than be trapped inside the building like rats in a cage. Outside, for men waited near their wagon, all armed and watching the building with predatory interest. Their leader was a big man with a beard black as coal, wearing a hat that had seen better days and boots that looked expensive enough to have been taken from someone else's feet. "Well, well," the leader said, his eyes moving from Marcus to Clara with calculating interest. "What have we here?" "A gentleman and his lady, traveling alone through dangerous country." "We're just passing through," Marcus said calmly, keeping his hands visible but ready to draw if necessary. "Heading to California to start fresh." "California's a long way from here," another man observed. He was thin as a rail with nervous eyes that kept darting between Marcus's gun and Clara's face. "Dangerous journey for folks traveling light." Clara noticed that all four men wore gun belts, and their weapons looked well maintained. These weren't desperate drifters. They were professionals who'd chosen robbery as their trade. The wagon behind them was loaded with supplies and goods that probably belonged to other travelers who'd been less fortunate in their encounters. "We got separated from our traveling party," Clara said, thinking quickly. "They're probably looking for us right now." The bearded leader laughed, a sound like gravel in a coffee can. "Nice try, lady, but we've been watching this trail for 3 days. Nobody's passed through here except you two, and that dead horse we saw about 5 miles south." Marcus felt his blood run cold. These men had been following them, probably since they'd left the main trail to head for the mining camp, which meant they'd seen Buttercup's accident and knew exactly how vulnerable Clara and he really were. "What do you want?" Marcus asked bluntly. "Now that's a practical question," the leader said, stepping closer. "We want your horse, your supplies, and anything valuable you might be carrying. The lady can come with us. We'll treat her real nice until we reach the next town." "Over my dead body," Marcus said quietly. "That can be arranged," the thin man replied, his hand moving toward his gun. But before anyone could draw, Clara stepped forward despite the pain in her arm. "Wait," she said, her voice carrying an authority that surprised everyone present. "You're making a mistake." The bearded leader paused, curious despite himself. "What kind of mistake?" "You think we're helpless travelers with money and supplies worth stealing," Clara continued, meeting his eyes steadily. "But what you found is a former cavalry scout and a woman who just escaped hanging for murder in Prescott." Marcus shot her a questioning look, but Clara pressed on. "Ask yourselves why a man with my companion's skills would be traveling with someone like me. Ask why we're really heading to California instead of staying in Arizona territory." The four men exchanged uncertain glances. Clara's words had introduced doubt into what they'd assumed was a simple robbery, and doubt made men like these dangerous in unpredictable ways. "She's bluffing?" the thin man said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Maybe," the leader agreed slowly, "but maybe not. Tell you what, lady, prove you're as dangerous as you claim, and we might consider a partnership instead of a robbery." Clara felt her heart sink. She'd been hoping to scare them off, not invite them to test her claims. But she'd committed to this path, and now she had to see it through. "What kind of proof?" she asked. The leader pointed to a bottle sitting on a fence post about 30 yards away, left behind by the miners years ago. "Hit that bottle with your first shot, and we'll talk business. Miss it, and we take what we want anyway." Marcus realized what Clara was doing and felt admiration mix with fear in his chest. She was buying them time, creating an opportunity for him to act while the robbers were distracted. But she was also putting herself at tremendous risk. If her bluff was called, they'd both pay the price. "Clara," he said quietly, "you don't have to do this." "Yes, I do," she replied, holding out her good hand. "May I borrow your gun, Mr. Stone?" Marcus hesitated for a heartbeat, then handed her his pistol. The weapon felt heavy in Clara's hand, heavier than she'd expected. She'd fired guns before on her family's farm, but never under pressure like this, never with her life hanging in the balance. The four robbers spread out slightly, giving her room to shoot while positioning themselves to react quickly if this was some kind of trick. Clara could feel their eyes on her as she raised the pistol, trying to ignore the pain that shot through her injured arm with every movement. The bottle seemed impossibly small and far away in the pre-dawn gloom. Clara took a deep breath, steadied her aim as best she could, and gently squeezed the trigger. The gunshot cracked across the desert like thunder, and glass exploded in a shower of sparkling fragments as the bottle disintegrated. Even Clara looked surprised by her success, though she tried to hide it behind a mask of calm confidence. "Lucky shot," the thin man muttered, but the other robbers were looking at her with new respect. "Luck had nothing to do with it," Clara said coolly, handing the pistol back to Marcus. "Now, shall we discuss that partnership you mentioned?" The bearded leader studied her face for a long moment, searching for signs of deception or weakness. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Maybe we can work something out after all. Name's Carter. These are my associates Billy, Frank, and Tom." "I'm Clara," she replied. "This is Marcus. What kind of partnership did you have in mind?" Carter gestured toward their wagon. "We've been working this stretch of trail for 6 months, but it's getting harder to find good targets. Too many travelers are going around us, taking the northern route. We could use someone with local knowledge to help us find better hunting grounds." Clara felt sick at the casual way he talked about robbing innocent people, but she kept her expression neutral. "What would be our share?" "Depends on what you bring to the partnership," Carter replied. "Information's worth something, but not as much as active participation." Marcus watched this negotiation with growing tension. Clara was walking a tightrope, trying to convince these men she was willing to join their criminal enterprise while secretly planning their escape. One wrong word, one suspicious gesture, and the masquerade would collapse with deadly consequences. "We'll need time to consider your offer," Clara said finally. "This is a big decision." Carter nodded. "Fair enough. We'll make camp here for the day, rest our animals. You can give us your answer tonight." As the robbers moved back toward their wagon, Clara sagged against Marcus, the adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation finally fading. Her injured arm throbbed terribly, and her hands shook with delayed reaction to the danger they just faced. "That was either very brave or very foolish," Marcus whispered. "Probably both," Clara admitted. "But it bought us time. Now we just need to figure out how to use it." The scream that shattered the afternoon heat didn't come from Clara or Marcus. It came from Billy, the thin robber who'd been standing guard near their wagon when a sidewinder struck him faster than lightning, its fangs sinking deep into his ankle before he could even draw his gun. The desperate man's cries for help echoed across the abandoned mining camp as he collapsed, clutching his leg while the deadly snake slithered away into the rocks. "Snake bite!" Carter bellowed, dropping his coffee cup as he rushed toward his fallen companion. "Frank, get the whiskey. Tom, find something to tie off his leg." Clara watched the chaos unfold from inside their shelter, her medical instincts warring with her knowledge that these men planned to rob and possibly kill them. Billy writhed in the sand, his face already turning pale as the venom began its deadly work through his bloodstream. "We have to help him," Clara said quietly to Marcus, who was observing the scene through a gap in the wall. "Those men want to kill us," Marcus reminded her. "Why should we risk our lives to save one of theirs?" "Because it's the right thing to do," Clara replied, reaching for Dr. Mitchell's medical bag with her good hand. "And because if Billy dies, Carter might blame us anyway. Better to try saving him and earn some goodwill." Marcus studied her face, seeing the determination there that had helped her survive 3 days on death row. "You realize this could be our chance to escape? While they're distracted with Billy, we could take Thunder and ride out on one horse with my arm injured, into desert country with limited water?" Clara shook her head. "We wouldn't make it 10 miles before they caught us. But if I can save Billy's life, maybe Carter will be grateful enough to let us go peacefully." Outside, Billy's screams were getting weaker as the snake venom spread through his system. Carter was pouring whiskey over the bite wound while Frank tried unsuccessfully to fashion a tourniquet from a leather belt. Tom paced nearby, his face green with fear as he watched his friend slowly dying. "None of them know anything about treating snake bites," Clara observed, her voice heavy with professional frustration. "They're actually making it worse by cutting the wound and trying to suck out the poison." Marcus made his decision. "What do you need me to do?" Clara was already moving toward the door, medical bag in her uninjured hand. Follow my lead and be ready for anything. These men are scared, and scared people do unpredictable things. They emerged from their shelter to find Carter kneeling beside Billy, whose breathing had become shallow and rapid. The bite area was already swelling badly, turning an ugly purple color that spoke of serious venom poisoning. "Get away from him," Tom snarled, drawing his gun as Clara approached. "This is your fault somehow. You probably put that snake there." "Don't be stupid," Carter snapped, though his own hand rested on his weapon. "Snakes don't take orders from people." Clara knelt beside Billy despite Tom's threats, examining the wound with practiced eyes. The bite was on his ankle, and the swelling was spreading up his leg toward his knee. His pulse was rapid and thready, classic signs of severe envenomation. "How long ago was he bitten?" she asked Carter. "Maybe 10 minutes, Carter replied, watching her closely. "You know something about snake bites?" "Some," Clara said, opening her medical bag. "First thing, stop cutting the wound and don't try to suck out the poison. That just spreads it faster." She pulled out a small knife and began cutting away Billy's boot, ignoring his weak protests. The leather was already tight against his swollen foot, cutting off circulation and making the situation worse. "What kind of snake was it?" Clara asked as she worked. "Sidewinder," Frank said, his voice shaking. "Saw the rattle on its tail as it slithered away." Clara nodded grimly. Sidewinder bites were serious but rarely fatal if treated properly. The problem was that proper treatment required supplies and knowledge that most people didn't have in the middle of the desert. "I need clean water, lots of it," she told Carter. "And something to immobilize his leg, so the venom doesn't spread as fast." Carter hesitated, clearly torn between wanting to save his friend and maintaining his authority over the group. "Why should we trust you? How do we know you're not trying to finish him off?" "Because if I wanted Billy dead, I'd just wait and let the venom do its work," Clara replied bluntly. "I'm trying to save his life, but I need your help to do it." Marcus had positioned himself where he could watch all 3 remaining robbers while staying close enough to assist Clara if needed. The tension in the camp was thick enough to cut with a knife, fear and suspicion swirling like dust devils in the desert heat. "Tom, get the water barrel from our wagon," Carter ordered. "Frank, find some wooden splints we can use to keep his legs still." As the men scrambled to follow orders, Clara cleaned the bite wound as gently as possible. Billy's eyes were glazed with pain and shock, but he was still conscious enough to understand what was happening. "Am I going to die?" he whispered to Clara. "Not if I can help it," she replied, though privately she wasn't certain. Without proper antivenom, treating snake bites was mostly about managing symptoms and hoping the patient was strong enough to survive. Clara worked steadily through the afternoon, using every technique she'd learned from Dr. Mitchell and from watching her mother treat various injuries on their Missouri farm. She immobilized Billy's leg, applied cool compresses to reduce swelling, and forced him to drink small amounts of water to prevent dehydration. "The swelling stopped spreading," Marcus observed as evening approached. "That's a good sign, isn't it?" Clara nodded, wiping sweat from her forehead with her sleeve. "His pulse is getting stronger too. I think he's going to make it, but he'll need several days of rest before he can travel." Carter had been watching her work with growing respect and gratitude. "You saved his life," he said quietly. "Billy's been with me for 3 years. He's like a brother to me." "I did what anyone with medical training would do," Clara replied, repacking her supplies. "The question is, what happens now?" The bearded leader was quiet for a long moment, staring at his injured friend who was finally sleeping peacefully. When he looked up at Clara, his expression had changed completely from the predatory calculation of the morning. "I owe you a debt," Carter said simply. "You could have let Billy die, but you didn't. That means something to me." Tom and Frank exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with this change in their leader's attitude. They'd been looking forward to robbing Clara and Marcus, and now Carter was talking about debts and gratitude. "So what are you saying?" Tom asked suspiciously. "We just let them go with all their supplies?" Carter stood up slowly, his hand resting on his gun, but in a way that suggested the conversation was over. I'm saying we made a mistake this morning. These folks aren't our enemies, and we're not going to treat them like prey. But Carter, Frank started to protest. But nothing, Carter cut him off sharply. The woman saved Billy's life when she could have watched him die. That makes her better than us, and I won't repay kindness with robbery. Clara felt a mixture of relief and surprise. She'd hoped that saving Billy might buy them safe passage, but she hadn't expected Carter to have such a strong code of honor beneath his criminal exterior. We appreciate your change of heart, Marcus said carefully, but Billy can't travel for several days. What do you propose we do about that? Carter considered this problem. His weathered face creased with thought. We'll make camp here until Billy can ride. You're welcome to travel with us as far as the next town. There's safety in numbers, and you've proven you're good people to have around in a crisis. Clara exchanged a look with Marcus, reading the questions in his pale blue eyes. Traveling with reformed robbers wasn't ideal, but it solved their immediate problem of being stranded without a horse for her to ride. There's one condition, Carter continued. What we discussed this morning about partnership, that's forgotten. We're going straight, starting now. No more robbing travelers. No more taking what doesn't belong to us. Tom and Frank looked stunned by this announcement, but neither man seemed willing to challenge Carter directly. Billy was still their friend, and they'd seen how quickly things could go wrong in the wilderness. What will you do for money? Clara asked curiously. Carter smiled grimly. Same thing honest folks do, find work, earn wages, build something instead of just taking it. Maybe it's time we remembered what that feels like. As night settled over the mining camp, Clara found herself sitting by the fire with 4 men who'd started the day as enemies and ended it as unlikely traveling companions. The desert had a way of changing people, of stripping away pretense and revealing what really mattered. Billy was sleeping peacefully, his breathing steady and his fever broken. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as they prepared to travel together toward California, but tonight Clara felt something she hadn't experienced since leaving Prescott. Hope for the future. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the small dramas of human life playing out in the abandoned mining camp. But beneath those stars, 6 people were learning that sometimes the most important journeys weren't about reaching a destination. They were about discovering who you could become along the way. Thunder's hoofbeats drummed against the hard-packed earth as Marcus pushed the stallion to his limit, racing toward the dust cloud that marked where Clara and the others had vanished just minutes before. The Apache war party had appeared out of nowhere, swooping down on their small group like hawks diving for prey, and in the chaos that followed, Clara had been swept away with Carter's wagon while Marcus fought to control their pack animals. "Hang on, Clara," he whispered through gritted teeth, his pale eyes fixed on the distant dust trail that was already beginning to fade in the desert heat. "I'm coming." The attack had happened so fast that Marcus could barely piece together what he'd seen. One moment they'd been traveling peacefully through a narrow canyon, discussing their plans for reaching the next town. The next, painted warriors had materialized from behind the red rock walls, their war cries echoing off the stone like thunder from an angry sky. Billy had still been too weak from the snake bite to fight effectively, and Frank had panicked completely, firing wild shots that hit nothing but empty air. Only Tom had kept his head, helping Carter return fire while trying to get their wagon moving toward the canyon mouth. But the Apache had cut off their escape route with tactical precision that spoke of military experience. These weren't desperate raiders looking for easy targets. They were seasoned warriors following a well-planned strategy to capture rather than kill. Marcus had seen Clara's terrified face through the wagon's canvas cover as Carter whipped his horses into a gallop, following the only route the Apache had left open, deeper into the desert where no rescue would be possible. Then thunder had reared as a warrior tried to grab his bridle, and by the time Marcus regained control, the wagon was gone. Now he followed their trail across the unforgiving landscape, reading the story written in hoofprints and wool ruts. The Apache were herding the wagon toward something, driving Carter's group in a specific direction rather than simply pursuing them. That suggested a larger plan, possibly involving other war parties or a main camp where prisoners would be held. The sun climbed higher as Marcus rode, turning the desert into a furnace that sapped strength from both horse and rider. Thunder was beginning to foam at the mouth from the brutal pace, but Marcus didn't dare slow down. Every minute that passed took Clara farther away from rescue and deeper into danger. After 2 hours of hard riding, Marcus crested a low ridge and saw something that made his blood run cold. In the valley below, the Apache had indeed been herding the wagon straight toward a larger force of at least 20 warriors who'd been waiting in ambush near a water hole. The wagon sat motionless in the center of the makeshift camp, surrounded by armed men whose faces showed no mercy for their captives. Marcus could see Carter and his men sitting on the ground with their hands bound, but there was no sign of Clara among the prisoners. "Where is she?" Marcus muttered, scanning the camp through the shimmering heat. Then he spotted a separate group of Apache women near a cluster of desert willows, and his heart sank as he realized the implications. Clara had been separated from the men, taken by the women for reasons that probably had to do with tribal customs regarding female captives. Whether that was good news or bad would depend entirely on what the Apache planned to do with their prisoners. Marcus studied the layout of the camp with a soldier's eye, calculating distances and cover points. A direct assault would be suicide, 20-to-1 odds against skilled warriors who knew the terrain better than he did. But stealth might offer possibilities, especially if he waited for darkness. The problem was that Apache war parties rarely stayed in one place for long. If they decided to move their prisoners to a more permanent location, Marcus might lose track of them completely in the vast desert wilderness. As he watched from his hidden position, Marcus saw an Apache war leader emerge from a council circle near the water hole. The man was older than the other warriors, his face marked with the scars of many battles, his bearing suggesting authority that came from proven leadership. The war leader approached Carter and spoke to him in broken English, gesturing toward the bound prisoners. Marcus was too far away to hear the words, but Carter's response seemed to anger the Apache leader, who struck him across the face with a swift backhand. "They're negotiating," Marcus realized, understanding dawning in his mind. The Apache want something specific, and they're using the prisoners as leverage to get it. This changed everything. If the Apache had captured Clara and the others for ransom or trade rather than revenge, it meant they'd be kept alive at least temporarily. But it also meant Marcus would need more than just courage and gun skills to rescue them. He'd need to figure out what the Apache wanted and find a way to give it to them. Marcus retreated from his observation point and found shelter among a cluster of boulders where he could rest thunder and plan his next move. The stallion was exhausted from the hard chase, his black coat white with salt from dried sweat. "Easy, boy," Marcus whispered, giving Thunder a drink from his precious water supply. "We'll get her back, but we need to be smart about it." As afternoon wore into evening, Marcus worked out a desperate plan. The Apache camp was positioned to control access to the water hole, which meant they expected other travelers to pass this way. If Marcus could create a diversion, something that would draw most of the warriors away from the camp, he might be able to slip in and free the prisoners. But timing would be everything, and if his plan failed, Clara and the others would pay the price for his mistake. As darkness began to settle over the desert, Marcus made his final preparations. He checked his weapons, secured his supplies, and wrote a brief letter explaining what had happened in case someone found his body later. Then he mounted Thunder and rode toward the distant glow of the Apache campfires. In the enemy camp, Clara sat with her hands bound near a small fire tended by Apache women whose faces showed neither cruelty nor kindness, only the weary acceptance of people who'd seen too much violence in their lives. She'd been given water and a small portion of food, treatment that suggested her captors had specific plans for her beyond simple revenge. The Apache women spoke among themselves in their own language, occasionally glancing at Clara with expressions she couldn't read. One of them, a girl who couldn't have been more than 16, seemed curious about Clara's injured arm and the sling that still supported it. "Hurt?" the girl asked in halting English, pointing to Clara's arm. Clara nodded, demonstrating how the sling worked. "Horse fell," she explained simply. "Arm hurt, but healing." The girl translated this for the other women, who nodded with understanding. They'd all dealt with injuries from falls and accidents. It was part of life in the harsh desert country they called home. As the night deepened, Clara found herself thinking about Marcus and wondering if he'd survived the attack. She'd seen him fighting to control Thunder as the Apache closed in, but the chaos had been too complete for her to know what happened after Carter's wagon carried her away. She had to believe Marcus was alive, had to hope he was tracking them even now. The alternative, that she was truly alone among hostile strangers in the middle of the desert, was too frightening to contemplate. Near the main fire, the Apache war leader was speaking with Carter again, their conversation more animated than before. Clara couldn't hear the words, but she could see the frustration in both men's gestures. Whatever the Apache wanted, Carter either couldn't or wouldn't provide it. Then she heard something that made her heart leap with desperate hope. The distant sound of a horse's whinny, so faint she might have imagined it. But the Apache guards heard it too, their heads turning toward the darkness beyond the circle of firelight. One of the warriors barked an order in Apache, and several men grabbed their weapons and melted into the night like shadows. The camp's relaxed atmosphere vanished in an instant, replaced by the tense readiness of fighters preparing for battle. Clara held her breath, praying that the sound meant Marcus was out there somewhere, planning a rescue. But she also knew that if he tried to fight 20 Apache warriors alone, he'd die in the attempt. The desert night held its secrets close, and only time would reveal whether hope or tragedy waited in the darkness beyond the dying campfires. In the distance, a coyote howled, or perhaps it was something else entirely, a signal that would change everything for the captives waiting in the Apache camp. The explosion that ripped through the night sky came from Marcus's dynamite stick stolen from the abandoned mining camp, detonating against the cliff face 200 yards from the Apache camp, sending rocks cascading like deadly rain while flames painted the darkness in shades of orange and gold. The blast echoed across the desert like the voice of an angry god, and within seconds half the Apache warriors were racing toward the source of the disturbance, leaving their prisoners under lighter guard. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs as she recognized the sound for what it was, Marcus's signal that rescue was coming. The Apache women around her fire began chattering nervously, their eyes fixed on the distant glow where burning brush marked the explosion site. Even their guards seemed uncertain whether to investigate the blast or remain with their captives. "What was that?" Carter whispered from where he sat bound near the main fire, his weathered face reflecting the flickering flames. "Sounded like dynamite," Tom replied, hope creeping into his voice for the first time since their capture. Maybe miners working a claim nearby. But Clara knew better. The timing was too perfect, the location too convenient to be coincidence. Marcus had found them, and now he was creating the diversion they needed to escape. The question was whether she could free herself and help the others before the Apache warriors returned from investigating the explosion. The young Apache girl who'd shown interest in Clara's injured arm was standing now, peering toward the distant fire with curious eyes. Most of the other women had moved closer to the main camp, drawn by the excitement and leaving Clara with only one elderly guard who seemed more interested in the commotion than his prisoner. Clara tested her bonds carefully, feeling for any weakness in the leather strips that held her wrists. The Apache had tied her securely but not cruelly. The bindings were tight enough to prevent escape but loose enough to allow blood flow. Working slowly so as not to attract attention, she began trying to slip her smaller hand through the leather loop. Near the cliff where the explosion had occurred, Marcus was already moving toward his second position. The dynamite blast had been the easy part. Now came the dangerous work of actually reaching the prisoners and getting them away from the camp. He'd counted at least 8 warriors racing toward the explosion site, which left roughly a dozen still guarding the captives. Still terrible odds, but better than 20 to 1. Marcus had spent the afternoon studying the camp's layout, memorizing every fire pit, every guard position, every possible escape route. The Apache had chosen their location well. The water hole provided a necessary resource, while the surrounding rocks offered defensive positions. But those same rocks could provide cover for someone approaching from the right direction. Moving like a ghost through the desert scrub, Marcus worked his way toward the cluster of willows where Clara was being held. Thunder waited a quarter-mile away, hidden in an arroyo with enough grain and water to last through a hard chase. If Marcus could reach Clara and get her to the horse, they might have a chance of escaping before the Apache realized what was happening. Back in the camp, Clara had managed to work her right hand partially free of its binding. The leather was slick with blood where it had rubbed her wrist raw, but the pain meant nothing compared to the possibility of freedom. The elderly Apache guard was still watching the distant fire, occasionally calling out questions to the women in their own language. "Easy," Clara whispered to herself, forcing her movements to remain slow and deliberate. Panic would only make her clumsy, and clumsiness would get them all killed. Finally, her hand slipped through the loop with a sensation like breaking free from quicksand. Clara kept her arms positioned as if they were still bound while she worked on freeing her left hand. The process was agonizing with her injured arm, but desperation gave her strength she didn't know she possessed. A new commotion erupted from the direction of the explosion as the Apache warriors discovered Marcus's second surprise. A series of small fires he'd set to suggest a larger force was attacking from multiple directions. Their shouts and war cries echoed across the desert, and Clara saw several more guards leave their posts to investigate. Now or never. Clara slipped her second hand free and immediately began working on the rope around her ankles. The young Apache girl had turned back toward their fire, but she was still watching the distant excitement rather than paying attention to her prisoner. "Almost there?" Clara breathed, feeling the ankle bindings loosen. Her heart was beating so loud she was certain everyone in camp could hear it. But the Apache seemed focused entirely on the mysterious attack that was apparently developing near the cliffs. From the shadows beyond the willow trees, Marcus watched Clara working to free herself and felt pride mix with fear in his chest. She was proving herself to be as brave and resourceful as he'd hoped, but they weren't safe yet. The Apache warriors who'd gone to investigate his diversions would return soon, and when they did, they'd be angry and suspicious. Marcus checked his pocket watch by the light of a distant fire. He'd given himself 20 minutes to reach Clara and start their escape, enough time to work through the camp's defenses, but not enough for the Apache to organize a proper search of the explosion site. 15 minutes had already passed. Moving from shadow to shadow, Marcus closed the distance to Clara's position. The elderly guard was the main obstacle now. The man stood between Marcus and Clara with a rifle in his hands and eyes that seemed to miss nothing despite his age. But as Marcus prepared to deal with the guard, fate intervened in an unexpected way. The old warrior suddenly doubled over with what appeared to be intense stomach pain, probably from something he'd eaten earlier. As he struggled with his discomfort, stumbling toward the privacy of some nearby bushes, Marcus saw his chance. He sprinted across the open ground between the rocks and the willow trees, covering the distance in heartbeats before sliding into the shadows beside Clara's fire. The young Apache girl looked up in surprise, her mouth opening to scream in alarm. "Quiet," Marcus whispered in the few Apache words he'd learned during his cavalry days, holding up his hands to show he meant no immediate harm. "Friend, help." The girl stared at him with wide eyes, clearly torn between fear and curiosity. She'd probably never seen a white man up close before, and Marcus's calm demeanor confused her more than frightened her. "Clara," Marcus whispered, reaching for the woman who'd become far more important to him than a simple traveling companion. "Marcus!" Clara's voice was filled with relief and joy as she threw her arms around him, ignoring the pain in her injured shoulder. "I knew you'd come. I knew you wouldn't abandon us. Can you walk?" Marcus asked urgently, checking her for new injuries. "Yes, but what about Carter and the others? We can't just leave them here." Marcus had been dreading this moment. He'd planned to rescue Clara first, then return for the men if possible. But Carter's group was being held near the main fire, surrounded by guards and positioned where any rescue attempt would be visible to the entire camp. "I'll come back for them," Marcus promised, though he wasn't sure how. "Right now we need to get you to safety before the warriors return." The young Apache girl was still watching them, her expression unreadable. She hadn't called for help yet, but Marcus knew that could change at any moment. Indian children were taught loyalty to their tribe from birth, and helping enemies escape would be considered betrayal. "Thank you," Clara said quietly to the girl, speaking the words in English but hoping the tone would convey her meaning. "You could have screamed, but you didn't." The girl tilted her head, studying Clara's face with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle. Finally, she pointed toward the main camp where Carter and his men were being held, then shook her head sadly. "Too many guards," Marcus interpreted. She's right. There's no way to reach them without fighting our way through half the camp. Clara's heart ached at the thought of leaving Carter behind after he'd protected her during the Apache attack. But she also knew that staying would only result in all of them becoming prisoners again. We have to try, she said desperately. Marcus was about to explain why that was impossible when a new sound cut through the night, the thunder of approaching hoofbeats from the direction of his explosion site. The Apache warriors were returning, and they'd be here within minutes. Decision time, Marcus said grimly, taking Clara's hand. We leave now or we don't leave at all. The young Apache girl suddenly stood up, walked to the edge of their fire, and called out something in her own language. Marcus tensed, expecting her to alert the guards to their presence. Instead, her words seemed to be a question about the distant fires, drawing the attention of the remaining guards away from the willow grove where Marcus and Clara were hiding. She's helping us, Clara realized with amazement. Why? Marcus wondered, but there was no time to find an answer. Thunder was waiting in the arroyo, and freedom was measured in minutes now. As they slipped away from the Apache camp into the vast darkness of the desert night, Clara looked back once at the fires that marked where Carter and his men were being held. She promised herself that if they survived this escape, she'd find a way to help the others. But first, they had to outrun 20 angry Apache warriors across terrain that could kill the unwary as surely as any bullet. Clara's scream echoed across the desert as thunder stumbled on loose shale, sending both riders tumbling down a steep ravine in a cascade of rocks and dust while Apache war cries grew closer with each passing second. Marcus rolled to protect Clara from the worst of the fall, his shoulder striking stone with enough force to send lightning bolts of pain through his entire body. My ankle, Clara gasped, trying to stand but immediately collapsing back to the sandy floor of the ravine. I think it's broken. Marcus forced himself upright despite the agony in his shoulder, his mind racing through their rapidly shrinking options. Thunder had regained his footing and was standing nearby, but the stallion was favoring his front left leg in a way that suggested he'd been injured in the fall. Above them, the sound of pursuing horses grew louder as the Apache war party closed the distance. Can you ride? Marcus asked, helping Clara to her feet and supporting her weight. I'll have to, Clara replied through gritted teeth, though her face was pale with pain. How bad is Thunder hurt? Marcus ran his hands along the stallion's leg, feeling for breaks or serious injury. Strained, maybe sprained, but nothing broken. He can carry us, but not fast and not far. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. They'd escaped the Apache camp only to find themselves trapped in a ravine with limited mobility and enemies closing in from above. The rocky walls that had broken their fall now formed a prison that offered little hope of escape. There, Clara pointed toward the far end of the ravine where shadows suggested a possible passage between the rocks. Maybe we can find another way out. Marcus boosted Clara carefully onto Thunder's back, wincing as his injured shoulder protested the movement. The stallion stood patiently despite his own discomfort, as if understanding that all their lives depended on his cooperation. They moved slowly through the narrow canyon, Thunder picking his way carefully over loose rocks and debris that had accumulated over countless flash floods. The walls rose steeply on both sides, cut smooth by water and wind into shapes that looked like frozen waves in the starlight. Behind them, Apache voices echoed off the canyon walls as the warriors discovered where their quarry had fallen. Soon they'd be coming down into the ravine, and then the hunt would become a deadly game of hide and seek among the rocks. Marcus, Clara said quietly, if they catch us, I want you to know something. Save your strength, Marcus replied, but Clara continued anyway. You've given me more than just my life back. You've shown me what it means to have someone who'll fight for you, no matter the odds. Her voice was steady despite their desperate situation. Whatever happens next, I'm grateful for that. Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion he hadn't expected. In the space of a week, this woman had gone from a stranger facing execution to someone whose safety mattered more to him than his own life. The realization was both terrifying and liberating. Nothing's going to happen to you, he said firmly. I didn't come this far to lose you now. The ravine began to widen ahead of them, opening into a broader canyon that showed signs of seasonal water flow. Cottonwood trees grew in scattered groves, their leaves rustling softly in the night breeze. More importantly, the canyon floor was sandy enough to muffle Thunder's hoofbeats and covered with enough vegetation to provide concealment. "Listen," Clara whispered, holding up her hand. The Apache voices had stopped echoing from behind them. Either the warriors had given up the pursuit, unlikely, or they'd found another way into the canyon system and were now moving more quietly. Marcus preferred to assume the worst and plan accordingly. He guided Thunder toward a dense thicket of mesquite and desert willow, dismounting carefully to lead the injured horse through the thorny branches. The vegetation would hide them from casual observation, but it wouldn't stop determined trackers for long. "We need a better plan than just hiding," Clara said, sliding down from Thunder's back with Marcus's help. "The Apache know this country better than we do. They'll find us eventually." Marcus nodded, his mind working through the tactical situation. They were outgunned, outnumbered, and trapped in unfamiliar territory with limited mobility. On the positive side, they had weapons, some water, and the element of surprise if they chose to fight rather than run. "There might be another option," Marcus said slowly, an idea forming in his mind. "Something I learned during the war about dealing with Apache raiders." "What kind of option?" "Negotiation. The Apache respect courage, and they understand the concept of honorable combat. If I could challenge their war leader to single combat." Clara stared at him in the starlight. "That's insane. You'd be killed." "Maybe. But if I won, tribal custom would require them to let us go free. It's worth considering if running doesn't work." Before Clara could argue further, the sound of approaching footsteps reached them through the mesquite thicket. The Apache had indeed found their way into the canyon, and they were searching systematically through every possible hiding place. Marcus drew his pistol and checked the cylinder 4 shots remaining. Not much for a last stand, but enough to make a fight of it if necessary. Beside him, Clara pulled out the small knife she'd carried since leaving Prescott, its blade gleaming faintly in the filtered starlight. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by low voices speaking in Apache. Marcus could make out at least 3 different speakers, which meant the entire war party had probably made it into the canyon. They were being hunted by professionals who knew every trick of desert warfare. A branch snapped nearby, followed by a sharp intake of breath. One of the Apache had spotted something, maybe Thunder's hoofprints in the sand, maybe a broken twig from their passage through the thicket. "Here they come," Marcus whispered, raising his gun. But instead of warriors bursting through the vegetation with weapons ready, a single voice called out in careful English from perhaps 20 feet away. "Stone. Marcus Stone. I know you are there." Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. Someone in the Apache war party knew his name, which meant this wasn't a random attack on travelers. They'd been specifically targeted, hunted down by people who had personal reasons for wanting him captured. "Who are you?" Marcus called back, not revealing his exact position but acknowledging the truth of the speaker's words. "Someone who has waited long time to meet famous cavalry scout," came the reply. "Someone who remembers blue soldiers who burned Apache village 5 years ago." The pieces clicked into place in Marcus's mind with sickening clarity. During his service with the cavalry, his unit had participated in punitive raids against Apache settlements suspected of harboring raiders. It had been brutal, necessary work that had left scars on his conscience and apparently created enemies who neither forgot nor forgave. "I remember," Marcus said quietly. "What do you want?" "Justice. You killed my brother in raid on our village. Shot him down when he tried to protect his family." Clara looked at Marcus with questions in her eyes, but he kept his attention focused on the invisible speaker beyond the thicket. The past had finally caught up with him in the worst possible place and time. "Your brother was armed and shooting at soldiers," Marcus replied. "I did what I had to do to protect my men. And now I do what I must to protect my people," the Apache leader said. "You will come out or we will burn you out. Woman can go free if she wishes. Our quarrel is with you." Clara's hand found Marcus's arm, gripping tightly. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't sacrifice yourself for me." Marcus stared into her green eyes, seeing fear and determination in equal measure. She was asking him to fight, to risk both their lives rather than surrender himself to Apache justice. It went against every protective instinct he'd developed since meeting her. "I need a minute to think," Marcus called to the Apache leader. "You have until moon clears those rocks," came the reply. "Then we come for you anyway." Marcus looked up at the moon, estimating they had perhaps 10 minutes before the deadline. 10 minutes to decide whether to fight, surrender, or try some desperate third option that might save them both. "Clara," he said quietly, "if I surrender myself, they'll let you go. You can take Thunder and ride to the nearest town. Send word to your sister in California." "Absolutely not," Clara said firmly. "We started this journey together, and we'll finish it together, whatever that means." In the distance, a coyote howled, or perhaps it was an Apache signal. Either way, time was running out for the two people hiding in the mesquite thicket, preparing to make a choice that would determine whether their story ended in the desert sand or continued toward the golden promise of California. The moon continued its slow climb toward the rocks that marked their deadline, indifferent to the human drama playing out in its silver light. Marcus Stone stepped out from the mesquite thicket with his hands raised, his pistol hanging loose in his holster as moonlight revealed the face of the Apache war leader, a man whose scarred features told the story of battles fought and brothers lost in the endless conflict between two peoples trying to survive in an unforgiving land. The recognition was mutual and immediate, sending a chill down Marcus's spine as memories of that terrible day 5 years ago came flooding back with crystal clarity. "Nailnish," Marcus said quietly, using the Apache name he remembered from intelligence reports. "I wondered if our paths would cross again." The Apache leader stood 20 feet away, flanked by 6 warriors whose painted faces remained expressionless despite the tension crackling between their leader and the white cavalry scout who'd killed his brother. Nailnish held a rifle with practiced ease, but Marcus noticed the man's trigger finger rested alongside the weapon rather than on it, a sign that talking might still be possible. "You remember," Nailnish said, his English careful and precise. "Good. Makes this easier." Clara emerged from the thicket behind Marcus, her injured ankle forcing her to lean heavily on Thunder's saddle for support. The Apache warriors tensed at her movement, but Nailnish held up his hand to keep them calm. "The woman stays out of this," Marcus said firmly. "Your quarrel is with me, not her." "Woman made her choice when she rode with you," Nailnish replied, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely comfortable with including Clara in their confrontation. "Apache way, we judge people by company they keep." Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders like a physical thing. Clara had trusted him to guide her safely to California, and instead he'd led her into danger from his own past. The irony was bitter. He'd saved her from hanging in Prescott only to put her life at risk again in the desert. "What do you want?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Justice for my brother. Blood debt that must be paid." Nailnish's dark eyes never left Marcus's face. "You killed good man who only tried to protect his family from soldiers who came like thieves in night." "Your brother was shooting at my men," Marcus replied, the old arguments feeling hollow even as he spoke them. "I did what soldiers do in war." "This not war," Nailnish said, his voice rising with old anger. "This was raid on Sleeping Village. You came for horses and food, stayed to burn homes and kill anyone who resisted." Clara listened to this exchange with growing understanding of the complex history that had brought them to this moment. The Indian Wars weren't simple stories of good versus evil. They were tragedies born from two cultures fighting over the same land, each believing they had the right to defend their way of life. "I remember your brother," Marcus said quietly. "He was brave, stood his ground when he could have run. He had wife, 2 children, could not run and leave them to soldiers' mercy." Nailnish's grip tightened on his rifle. "Mercy that did not exist." The words hung in the desert air like smoke from a dying fire. Marcus knew the Apache leader was right about that raid. His unit had been ordered to destroy the village completely, to send a message that attacks on wagon trains and settlements would be met with overwhelming force. It had been brutal, necessary work that still haunted his dreams. So what happens now? Clara asked, her voice cutting through the tension. More killing? More revenge? Where does it end? Nailnish looked at her with surprise, as if he'd forgotten she could speak for herself. Ends when debt is paid. White man's blood for Apache blood. And then what? Clara pressed, taking a painful step forward despite her injured ankle. Your brother stays dead, Marcus dies, and nothing changes except there's more grief in the world. Woman speaks wisdom, one of the younger Apache warriors said in his own language, earning a sharp look from Nailnish. Marcus understood enough Apache to catch the gist of the comment, and he saw something flicker in Nailnish's eyes, doubt, perhaps, or at least uncertainty about the path he'd chosen. Your brother died fighting to protect his family, Marcus said, seizing on that moment of hesitation. He was a warrior doing his duty, same as I was doing mine. Killing me won't honor his memory. It'll just create another widow, another family destroyed by this endless cycle. You have wife? Nailnish asked, genuine curiosity replacing some of the anger in his voice. No, but Clara here. Marcus gestured toward her, then stopped himself. They weren't married, weren't even truly promised to each other. Yet the thought of her mourning his death felt like a knife in his chest. Clara is important to you, Nailnish observed, reading the emotion in Marcus's face with the skill of a man accustomed to judging character quickly and accurately. Yes, Marcus admitted. More important than I realized until now. The Apache leader studied both of them for a long moment, his weathered face thoughtful in the moonlight. When he spoke again, his tone had changed subtly, becoming less harsh and more contemplative. Apache way, when man wrongs another, debt can be paid with blood or with service. Blood is simple, final. Service. He paused, searching for the right words in English. Service allows both sides to live, maybe find different path. Clara felt her heart leap with hope. What kind of service? My people suffer from white man's diseases, Nailnish explained. Children die from sickness that medicine men cannot cure. We hear stories of white healing magic, but no white doctor will come to Apache territory. Marcus began to understand where this was leading. You want medical help. Woman showed skill healing snake bite, Nailnish said, looking directly at Clara. Saved life of white man when Apache warriors would have left him to die. Maybe she could teach our women white medicine ways. Clara's mind raced as she processed this unexpected proposal. You were watching us at the mining camp? You saw me treat Billy? Apache see everything in desert, Nailnish said with something that might have been a smile. We followed your group for 2 days watching, learning. You have healer's heart, treat enemy same as friend. The offer hung between them like a bridge across a chasm of cultural differences and historical grievances. Clara realized that this could be the solution that saved all their lives while actually accomplishing something meaningful. How long? Marcus asked. How long would we need to stay? Until autumn rains come, Nailnish replied. 2 moons, maybe 3. Long enough for woman to teach healing ways, for you to prove service is real, not trick. Marcus looked at Clara, seeing the decision forming in her green eyes. California and her sister Elizabeth would have to wait while they spent the summer in an Apache camp, trying to bridge the gap between 2 worlds that had been at war for generations. There would be conditions, Marcus said carefully. Clara's ankle is injured. She'd need time to heal before she could work with your people. And we'd need assurance of safe passage when our service is complete. Conditions accepted, Nailnish said without hesitation. Apache honor debts paid in full. Clara stepped forward, extending her hand in the white custom of sealing agreements. Then we accept your offer. Nailnish stared at her outstretched hand for a moment, then reached out and clasped it firmly. His grip was strong but not threatening, the handshake of a leader accepting worthy allies rather than defeated enemies. Strange day, the Apache war leader said, shaking his head slightly. Started hunting enemy, ended finding healers. As the Apache warriors began preparations for escorting Marcus and Clara to their main camp, Clara reflected on the unexpected turn their journey had taken. She'd left Prescott planning to reach California in a few weeks. Instead, She was about to spend months living among people she'd been taught to fear, learning their customs and sharing her knowledge in return. But looking at Marcus's profile in the moonlight, seeing the relief and something deeper in his pale blue eyes, she realized that some destinations were worth any detour. California would wait. Her sister would understand. Right now, she had a chance to help build understanding between two peoples who desperately needed to find common ground. The desert night seemed less hostile now, filled with possibility rather than danger. Sometimes the most important journeys weren't about reaching a specific place. They were about discovering who you could become when circumstances demanded your very best. The morning sun painted the California coastline in shades of gold and rose as Clara Stone stood on the deck of the steamship Pacific Star, her husband's strong arm around her waist as San Francisco Bay spread before them like a promise finally kept. 8 months had passed since that night in the Apache camp. 8 months of healing, teaching, learning, and discovering that love could grow even stronger when tested by hardship and service to others. Marcus smiled as he watched Clara's face light up at her first glimpse of the city she dreamed of reaching for so long. The journey that had begun with her near execution in Prescott had taken them through dangers they'd never imagined, but it had also brought them gifts they'd never expected each other, a deeper understanding of themselves, and the knowledge that they could face anything together. There, Clara pointed toward a white house perched on one of San Francisco's famous hills. That should be Elizabeth's neighborhood. I can hardly believe we're finally here. Believe it, Marcus said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. We've earned this moment. Behind them on the deck, their traveling companions were also taking their first look at their new home. Carter and his men had been freed from the Apache camp after a prisoner exchange negotiated by tribal elders, and they'd spent the past months working honest jobs while waiting for Marcus and Clara to complete their service. The former bandits had proven surprisingly skilled at legitimate trades when given the chance. Hard to believe this all started with me planning to rob you folks, Carter said, joining them at the ship's rail. Seems like a different lifetime now. Billy, fully recovered from his snake bite and sporting a deep tan from months of outdoor work, grinned at his former leader. Best decision you ever made was letting Clara save my life. Changed all of us for the better. The Apache experience had indeed changed them all. Clara had spent her months in the tribal camp teaching basic medical techniques to Apache women while learning their traditional healing methods in return. The exchange had been beneficial for everyone. Childhood diseases that had been devastating the tribe were brought under control, while Clara had gained knowledge of desert medicine that would serve her well in her new life. Marcus had found his own role serving as a liaison between the Apache and various army units, helping to negotiate peaceful solutions to conflicts that might otherwise have led to violence. His reputation as a fair dealer had grown throughout the territory, earning respect from both sides of the cultural divide. The Apache people taught me something important, Clara said as the ship moved closer to the dock. They showed me that healing isn't just about treating injuries or illness. It's about bringing people together, building understanding between different worlds. Think you'll miss it? Marcus asked. The camp, the work we were doing? Clara considered this thoughtfully. Parts of it, yes. But Nailnish was right when he said our service was complete. We did what we could, and now it's time for the next chapter. As the Pacific Star pulled into San Francisco's busy harbor, Clara could see crowds of people gathered on the docks. Immigrants and established residents, merchants and laborers, all part of the great mixing of cultures that made California unique. Somewhere in that crowd, her sister Elizabeth was waiting, probably wondering why Clara's letters had stopped coming from Arizona territory months ago. Nervous about seeing Elizabeth again? Marcus asked, reading her expression. A little, Clara admitted. I left Missouri as a single woman planning to visit my sister for a few months. Now I'm arriving married to a man she's never met, with stories about hangings and Apache camps that she'll probably think I'm making up. Marcus chuckled. She'll understand once she meets you. People can see when someone's found their place in the world. The ship docked with the usual chaos of ropes and shouted orders, passengers gathering their belongings while stevedores prepared to unload cargo. Clara and Marcus had few possessions. Their months in the Apache camp had taught them that happiness didn't require many material things. There. Clara suddenly pointed toward the dock. That's Elizabeth, the woman in the blue dress by the carriage. Marcus studied the woman Clara had indicated, seeing the family resemblance immediately. Elizabeth was taller than Clara and a few years older, but they had the same green eyes and determined expression. She was scanning the ship's passengers with obvious concern, clearly worried about her sister's delayed arrival. She looks worried, Marcus observed. She should be, Clara said with a rueful laugh. I was supposed to arrive 6 months ago with a simple story about working in Prescott. Instead, I'm showing up with a husband and an epic tale of adventure that would challenge anyone's belief. They made their way down the gangplank with their small bundle of possessions, Clara's heart racing with excitement and nervousness in equal measure. Elizabeth spotted them immediately, her face lighting up with relief and joy that quickly turned to confusion as she noticed Marcus beside her sister. Clara! Elizabeth called out, rushing toward them with her arms outstretched. Thank God you're safe. I was so worried when your letters stopped coming. The sisters embraced with the fierce intensity of people who'd feared they might never see each other again. Marcus stepped back to give them privacy, understanding that this reunion was a moment Clara had been dreaming about throughout their long journey. I'm sorry I worried you, Clara said, holding Elizabeth tightly. The last few months have been complicated. Elizabeth pulled back to study her sister's face, immediately noticing the changes that months of hardship and growth had brought. Clara looked older, more confident, with the bearing of someone who'd been tested and emerged stronger. You look different, Elizabeth said. Happier, but also, she searched for the right word. More settled, somehow. I am, Clara said, turning to include Marcus in the conversation. Elizabeth, I'd like you to meet my husband, Marcus Stone. Marcus, this is my sister Elizabeth. Elizabeth's eyes widened with shock. Husband? Clara, you never mentioned. When did you? How did you? It's a long story, Clara said with a smile. One that involves a near hanging, a gunfight, Apache warriors, and a healing ministry in the desert. I promise to tell you everything, but maybe we should start with the basics. Marcus stepped forward with his hat in his hands, offering Elizabeth a respectful bow. Mrs. Patterson, it's an honor to meet you. Clara's told me so much about you and your family. Elizabeth studied Marcus with the sharp eyes of a protective older sister, taking in his honest face, his respectful manner, and the way Clara moved closer to him unconsciously. Whatever story lay behind this surprise marriage, it was clear that her sister was genuinely happy. Well, Elizabeth said finally, I suppose we have a lot of catching up to do. James will be fascinated by whatever adventure brought you two together. As they walked toward Elizabeth's carriage, Clara reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. She'd left Prescott as a condemned woman with no hope for the future. Now she was arriving in California as a married woman with valuable skills, strong relationships, and a story that would inspire and amaze anyone who heard it. You know, she said to Marcus as they settled into the carriage, I think this is going to be the beginning of something wonderful. Marcus squeezed her hand gently. I think you're right. We've proven we can handle whatever life throws at us. California should be easy after Apache camps and desert bandits. Behind them, Carter and his men were making their own way into the city, ready to start fresh in a place where their past didn't define their future. The ship's whistle blew one final farewell as the Pacific Star prepared for its next voyage, carrying new dreamers toward their own adventures. The sun climbed higher over San Francisco Bay, warming the faces of people who traveled impossible distances to reach this golden shore. Some had come for gold, others for land, still others for the simple chance to become someone new. Marcus and Clara Stone had found something more valuable than gold. They'd found each other, and they'd learned that the most important journeys weren't about reaching a destination. They were about discovering who you could become when you had the courage to stand up for what was right, the wisdom to help others along the way, and the love to face any challenge together. As their carriage rolled through the streets of San Francisco toward Elizabeth's home, Clara smiled at the thought of all the stories they'd have to tell and all the adventures still waiting to be discovered. The silent cowboy who'd saved her life had become her husband, her partner, and her best friend. It was, she thought, a pretty good ending for a story that had begun with a noose around her neck.